One summer storm, two roommates, and a door that swung open without a knock. A brother stood in the hallway, eyes wide, heart protective. What happened next wasn't fireworks, just real, ordinary courage. The kind that turns embarrassment into understanding and a quiet crush into a steady, grown-up love worth keeping. If this story touches you, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us tell gentle, hopeful love stories today. Fade in on a quiet, tree-lined street in a Midwestern city. The kind where you still see kids chalking sidewalks and neighbors waving from porch swings. Late afternoon light lands soft across an old brick duplex above a family-run bakery that makes the whole block smell like cinnamon. Inside, we find Evan, 34, librarian, careful talker, steady listener, a man of window plants and warm socks, the sort who wipes the counters before they've had a chance to get messy. His roommate is Marco, 33, union carpenter, fixer of everything, playful in the way that makes crowded rooms feel lighter. They share the top floor, 2 bedrooms, one narrow hallway where every step creaks the same 3 familiar notes, a kitchen that collects evening sun, a living room with a second-hand couch and a coffee table covered in coasters from places they promise they'll visit. By the time summer rolls around, they've been living together for a year and change. What began as a simple arrangement, 2 adults splitting rent, grew its own quiet rhythm. Evan handled bills, groceries, and the calendar magnet on the fridge. Marco handled sinks that leaked, doors that stuck, and the shelf that decided it would prefer the floor. Their friendship had come at an easy pace, like a good conversation on a long drive. No hurry, enough silence to make room for the truth. This story starts on a day when the sky fell into a mood. A storm gathered, not noisy yet, just feeling big. The bakery owners downstairs pulled in their sidewalk sign and lowered their awning. People hurried their dogs home, and an old pickup eased under a maple tree and parked crooked, as though trucks could wish for cover. Inside the kitchen, Evan set a pot on the stove, chopped onions, slid them into a pan with olive oil, and leaned in to listen. Sizzle, then sweetness. Marco came home with a length of trim molding braced under his arm like a canoer with a paddle. He shook rain off his hair, grinned at the smell, and bumped Evan's shoulder gently with his own. "Chilly?" Marco asked. Evan nodded, stirring. "Figured we could use something comfortable. It's a storm kind of thing." "You make the kind with cocoa powder," Marco said, opening the cabinet to pull down bowls. "The kind you pretend is scientific, but it's really love." Evan smiled at the onion steam fogging his glasses. "If science makes you feel safer, we'll call it science." They worked in parallel, the way they always did, with little jokes flicked back and forth the way kids toss a ball in their front yard. The lights blinked once, testing, teasing, then steadied. Marco kissed 2 fingers and pressed them to the side of the fridge where they've stuck a magnet that says, "This too shall pass." And underneath, a neighbor's scrawled phone number with an arrow and the word ladder in case you need. There is a thing that happens to people who live kindly around each other. They get used to the shape of each other's lives. Evan knew the exact sound Marco's boots made on the back steps. Knew the mornings he hummed when shaving meant he'd slept well. Knew the look that meant his mother had called and he needed to take a minute on the porch, breathing slow. Marco knew which chair Evan chose when he wanted to feel safe, which mug felt like home in his hands, which songs made him tear up and pretend he had allergies. They learned the little languages, the quiet ways people say who they are without words. Now, this is a love story, but it's also a story about how love lives in ordinary rooms and sometimes gets interrupted by ordinary mistakes. Thunder rolled closer. Evan poured canned tomatoes into the pot. Marco set spoons by the bowls and, because he liked a touch of ceremony, folded napkins like triangles. "I always mean to learn the swan," he said. "Then I fold a tent and hope no one notices." "You fold a tent," Evan said. "Which is excellent if we get stuck in a snowstorm and have to camp inside." "Look at us," Marco said. Prepared men. They ate early, the windows turning into mirrors as the sky darkened. The storm finally announced itself with a sound like the sky clearing its throat. Then rain came, steady, the kind that carries away yesterday's heat. They moved to the living room with bowls refilled, heavy socks on, the baseball game on low, no one caring who was ahead. When the lights finally surrendered, once, twice, then a patient sigh into darkness. Evan found the flashlight in the drawer where he always kept it, and Marco lit the fat candle that smelled like orange peel and clean pine. Their landlord had left it after Christmas, apologizing for the draft in the stairwell, promising a fix in spring that still hadn't arrived. Evan sat on the couch and tucked his knees under a blanket. Marco sat too, close enough that their shoulders met. "You ever get scared in storms?" Marco asked, voice casual, the way people talk when they're offering you room to tell them the truth. "As a kid, yes," Evan said. "Now no. Or," he laughed gently, "I respect them. That counts as not being stubborn, which I consider growth." "My brother Ryan used to tell me thunder was just clouds bowling," Marco said. "Sometimes he told me it was angels moving furniture. He's got an imagination that shows up first and asks questions later." Evan let that phrase land. He knew about Ryan. They'd both seen him around the building, stopping by with a spare socket wrench or a Tupperware of his wife's brownies, the kind that had a glossy top that looked like the surface of a pond. Ryan had a habit of letting himself in because he had a copy of Marco's key from before Evan moved in, back when Marco was new to the city, and found himself calling his older brother to borrow a ladder or to ask, "Where people buy good olive oil around here?" "He means well," Marco always said. When Ryan showed up with a bag of apples in September, or stood in the kitchen holding half a ceiling fan, he shows up, Evan would say. "He shows up," Marco would echo. Grateful, and truly, this is what family is for many of us. Showing up, sometimes imperfectly, sometimes at the wrong time, sometimes through a door we wish they'd paused at first to knock. But for now, the couch, the blanket, the candle, the rain. Marco told a story about a porch swing that refused to stay level. Evan told one about the woman who whispered to every plant at the library before she watered it like she was reminding them of their names. They made each other laugh. They did that thing where you pick up your spoon and touch it absent-mindedly to your lips, and don't take a bite because the conversation has become enough. It would be reasonable, at this point, to ask, did they know? Did Evan know that he loved the way Marco's hands moved when he explained anything? Did Marco know that the way Evan watched rain, not braced, not worried, just present, was teaching him how to stay? They did. They didn't. Love can be obvious and still take its time to feel safe enough to say its own name out loud. "Sometimes," Marco said, after a long, comfortable quiet, "I want to build a table people can pass down, like something steady enough to hold soup bowls and arguments and birthdays." "You're going to do that," Evan said, like he already saw it. "You're going to put your name under it, and someone will find it 40 years from now and run their fingers over the letters like they're reading kindness." "My grandfather did that," Marco said. "Not the name part. He just made things that outlasted trouble." "Then you have a blueprint," Evan said. "That's what a family story is." The rain softened. The candle flame leaned as if listening. The air between them felt like a porch light left on. And then there was a scratching at the door, a key, a shoulder, the sound of someone making themselves familiar. And before either of them gathered to stand, the knob turned. The door swung open. "Yo!" Ryan called, stepping into the living room, shaking rain from his baseball cap. "You gotta—" He stopped, because here was a room in which he had not knocked. And here were two men close on a couch under a blanket with a candle on the table and a game on the TV. And here was an intimacy he hadn't given them time to wrap up and stow away in a drawer. The embarrassment that follows these moments is not reserved for one person alone. It landed on all three of them. Evan's shoulders jerked, his bowl rattled a spoon. Marco sat up, and the blanket fell from both their laps in a small, polite collapse. Ryan closed his mouth. He took 2 quick steps backward and said, "Shoot, sorry. I thought you—" "Marco, you said the back lock sticks and—" He held up a shopping bag like a shield. "I brought those cabinet latches you wanted." "I didn't. I'm sorry. Hi, evening. Didn't mean to—" He reached for the knob. He pulled the door mostly closed. Then he knocked. 3 quick times, a kind of apology spoken in sound. "Come in," Marco said, voice calm and softened by a loyalty that ran deeper than awkwardness. He stood and moved toward his brother. "It's okay." Ryan opened the door just enough to look like he'd been invited. His cheeks were flushed with the heat of having made a mistake. He stepped in carefully, as though he was entering a hospital room, and looked at Evan with a sincerity that was easy to read. "Evan, I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to startle you guys. I should have knocked. I wasn't thinking." Evan stood and set his bowl on the coffee table. There are moments, if we're lucky, when kindness rises faster than the urge to defend ourselves. "It's okay," he said, and meant it, because he could see that Ryan was a good man surprised by his own habit. "Your family. Just next time, please knock." "I will," Ryan said, nodding like he was making a vow. "I will, I promise." Marco took the bag. "You want to weather the storm here for a minute?" he asked. "Power's out. Chili's warm." For a heartbeat, Ryan looked like he would flee, like an embarrassed teenager who knocked over a display in a store. Then he exhaled and let the front of his shoulders relax. "If you'll have me," he said. I brought brownies. Lisa said if I didn't bring the container home, I'm sleeping in the shed." They made room. They always did. Ryan sat on the armchair by the window, the one that never stopped being slightly cold because the window didn't seal all the way. He rubbed his hands together, glanced at the candle, at the blanket, at the bowl of chili in front of him when Marco returned from the kitchen carrying one. He ate, making appreciative sounds that made Evan smile despite himself. The three of them found conversation in easy places. The storm moving east, the ball game, the neighbor down the block who planted tomatoes like it was a dare. If you've never had to learn to be tender in front of your own family, this part may seem simple. If you have, you know the work of breathing on purpose, of solving simple questions. Where do my hands go? How do I sit? What does my face show? That night they practiced, all three, in their own ways. When the rain slackened and the electricity returned with a click and a hum, Ryan stood to leave. He put his bowl in the sink without asking, the way people do when they grew up learning to look for small kindnesses. He hesitated by the door. "I'm sorry again," he said to both of them clearly. "I've gotten used to popping in to help. I didn't think that, well, you're right. Next time I'll knock." He scratched the brim of his hat and found the phrase. "That's respect." "Thanks," Evan said. "Love you," Marco said. "Love you," Ryan answered. "Also, the latches are in the bag." "Tomorrow," Marco said. "Tonight we digest." Ryan grinned and left, this time closing the door from the outside the way you do when you're careful. The latch clicked. The room exhaled. It's a small thing, a habit relearned. But sometimes small things are the gates to larger ones. After the door closed, Evan sat back down and let the blanket cover his knees again. He looked at Marco. Marco looked at him. The candle burned lower, casting a soft light like the inside of a seashell. "Evan," Marco said, and then stopped, as if he could feel the weight of what lived in that word. "I know," Evan said. "It's okay." "No," Marco said. "Not okay, like okay, I'll never say it." "Okay as in, okay if I tell the truth." Evan nodded. "Yes," he said gently. "Please." Marco breathed in like he'd been holding his breath for longer than the storm had lasted. "I like how we live," he said. "I like that your socks get lost in the laundry and I find them in the pillowcases and it makes me laugh. I like that you ask the woman who sits by the library window how her day is and she lights up like you just turned summer back on. I like when we're quiet after eating, when you look at a bowl like you're grateful it exists. I like that I can hear my grandfather in your voice when you talk about steady things. And I love how it feels to be on a couch with you when the lights go out and I don't feel like I'm missing anything." Evan's eyes stung in a way that had nothing to do with onions. He laughed, a short sound that held relief like a folded letter. "I love that you fold napkins in triangles and pretend it's on purpose," he said. "I love that you brought plants back from the edge like you were coaxing them with stories. I love that you know which screw to turn for each squeak in this old place. I love that you make a room feel safe without trying. And I love," he swallowed, then went on, "I love you." They sat in that easy, honest quiet, each sentence of love a plank laid side by side, building something you could stand on. No grand gestures, no fireworks. Two grown men telling the truth. At home. Now, love is not separate from the world around it. It needs room. It needs respect. It needs the courtesy of a knock. The next morning, the building smelled like cinnamon again. The sun made the floors shine. Evan and Marco made coffee and sat at the small table, bare knees touching because the day had learned to be bright. Marco poured a second cup and set it in front of an empty chair. He looked at the front door, almost like a joke. There it was, the threshold that asks a person to pause. Do you think we should call him? Evan asked. I do, Marco said. I want to talk about keys and knocking and maybe also give him a chance to say the thing he probably wants to say. Marco searched for the compassionate word. He looked like a good man who made a wrong size assumption. They called. Ryan answered on the second ring, apologizing before saying hello. I keep thinking about it, he said. I hate that I barged in and made you feel like your home wasn't yours. It is ours, Marco said. We want you in it as our family, but we need a knock, Rye. I know, Ryan said. I'll knock. I'll call. I'll text from 2 blocks away. I'll sing from the sidewalk. Whatever you need. Just the knock, Evan said, smiling. Singing, only on holidays. Deal, Ryan said, laughing, a sound that made his embarrassment soften. Then quieter. Can I also say, I'm happy for you? Both of you. I didn't know, and that's okay. Now I do, and I'm glad. My favorite part of being your brother, Marco, is watching you figure out how to make a home. If this is part of that, if Evan is part of that, then I'm all in. Thank you, Marco said, voice thick with a softness he rarely let other people hear. Ryan cleared his throat in the way big brothers do when their feelings overflow. We're having Sunday dinner, he said. Mom's making the roast she swears you like better than hers, even though it's hers. Lisa says bring Evan if he wants to come. Evan caught Marco's eye. Dinner meant family. Dinner meant being seen. Dinner meant trying. He nodded. I'd like to, Evan said, leaning toward the phone so his voice would feel closer. Thank you for including me. Of course, Ryan said. Come, eat. Tell Mom her roast is perfect. Be safe driving home. Text me when you get in. Standard family operations. They hung up with that strange mix of nerves and relief a person knows when a door they care about is both heavy and newly oiled. The day went on. Groceries, laundry, a trip to the hardware store where Marco bought a new doorbell chime because the old one had the personality of a toll booth. They joked about getting a doormat that said, please knock. We're hiding from the doorbell. They bought it. Humor can be a bridge. They placed it in front of the door like a quiet, insisted-on truth. That week, life did what it does. It continued. Evan went to the library and helped a man print a resume who had forgotten his Gmail password and grew flustered when the clock ticked toward the bus schedule. Evan found the password recovery button, handed him a glass of water, and said, You're doing fine, in a tone that made time feel less sharp. Marco spent a day installing cabinets in a new family's kitchen, careful to level each one with a patience that came from his grandfather's old admonition. Once you hang it, you're the last person who can decide to do right by it. At night they cooked, they ate. They walked around the block and waved at Mrs. Whitaker, who sat on her porch with a book the size of a doorstop and a glass of iced tea. She peered at them over the top of the pages and said, You boys need any mint? Mine is trying to take over the house. They took a handful of mint and left an apple pie a week later, even though the bakery downstairs could have made one better. Because what matters is the exchange of kindnesses, not their perfection. They grew closer in small, reliable ways. Evan started leaving a sticky note on the microwave for Marco on early mornings. Lunch in the fridge, be safe. Marco texted photos from job sites of things he was proud of. A seamless corner, a set of drawers that glided like they'd been greased with a secret. When Evan had a tough day, Marco sat on the floor with him and put a hand on his knee and said nothing until words found their place again. Sunday came. The drive to Ryan's house took 20 minutes. The sky was one of those crisp blue Midwestern sky colors that looks like it could shatter if someone spoke too loudly. Evan wore a button-down that made him feel like his best self. Marco wore the shirt his sister-in-law had given him last Christmas, a deep green that made his eyes read as two behavior of the same forest. Ryan's house smelled like roast and rosemary. Lisa opened the door in an apron dusted with flour, hugging them both before they could step over the threshold. Hugging in the doorway counts as extra welcome. In the living room, Ryan was fixing the hinge of a cabinet that squeaked just one squeak too many for his peace of mind. He looked up and smiled a real smile. "Hey," he said, "you made it. They did that thing families do. They started in the kitchen, each person making themselves half useful." Evan chopped carrots while Lisa told him where the cutting board lived. Marco mashed potatoes with the kind of smooth commitment that produces 0 lumps, and an uncle who will talk about it for a decade. Ryan set chairs around the table and then checked them all for wobble, because this is who he is. He steadies things. Marco's mother, Nora, arrived with a pie and a sweater she insisted she didn't need but wanted to show someone. She hugged Evan like she knew him from kindergarten and loved him because he had shared crayons nicely. "I've heard you make a chili that could comfort a thunderstorm," she said, laughing at her own joke. "I want to try it." Evan liked her instantly. She had the sort of aura that, if you could see it, would be a field of daisies with little paths for grandchildren to run down. Over dinner, she asked him questions that felt like open porches. He answered. He asked her about her work at the clinic, about her garden, about the way she'd taught her sons to be the men they were. She told him about the time Ryan rented a tuxedo jacket to wear over jeans to a school dance because he wanted to look like a country singer. Everyone laughed, each laugh carrying a slightly different shape of affection. At some point, conversation turned to habits. The doorbell rang. A neighbor dropped off a borrowed cake pan. Ryan knocked before re-entering his own kitchen as a joke, and everyone broke into warm laughter. "I deserve that," he said good-naturedly. Nora looked at him and then at Marco and then at Evan. She had a quiet way of seeing what needed gentleness without making a spectacle of it. "We're all learning," she said. "That's what family is. We learn, we change, we knock." Evan met her eyes. "Thank you," he said, with that particular gratitude people feel when they are told they belong in a sentence they didn't know they'd ever inhabit. After dinner, Ryan asked Evan to walk with him to the garage to look at a shelf he was thinking of building but likely didn't need to show anyone. They stood next to the snowblower under a fluorescent light, the smell of gasoline and grass cuttings filling the space. Ryan shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and bounced once on his heels. "I want to say this right," he said. "I'm not always quick on the first try." Evan waited, calm, ready to hear. "I wasn't surprised when I walked in," Ryan said. "I knew there was something steady between you two. My body moved before my brain applied manners. That's no excuse. I grew up in a house where we knocked on bedroom doors. I know better. And also," he glanced at Evan, then back at the shelves, then returned, like a man choosing the right road at a fork. "I've worried about the world being unkind to my little brother. He's happy with you. I can see that. You make him lighter. You make him—" He thought of a word, then nodded when it came. "More himself. I want that for him, so I'll do my part to make the world kinder starting at his front door." Evan felt the carefulness behind the words and let himself be moved. "Thank you," he said. "I want to be part of that world too. I want your brother to come home to a place he can trust. That includes you and the knock." They stood there a minute more, 2 men in a garage, doing the quiet work of building trust. Ryan pointed at the shelf. They made a joke about the number of screws a person could own and still need one more, and then they went back inside to pie. The weeks that followed were a slow collage of ordinary life, the kind that adds up to a love story when you stand back. Evan learned how to carry a sheet of plywood without feeling like it might carry him. Marco learned the library's interloan system well enough to put a hold on a cookbook he wanted to surprise Evan with. Ryan learned to text, headed up by his name and followed by any number of emojis that made Lisa laugh and pinch his cheek. He became, predictably, a person who knocked, a person who waited, a person who asked, "Is this a good time?" and meant it. One Saturday, Marco and Evan went to the farmer's market, where they ate peach slices offered on napkins and listened to a band cover songs from the '70s with sincerity that made the air softer. A woman selling quilts showed them one her grandmother had pieced together from old shirts. "If you look close enough," she said, "you can read our family's history. The plaid is my grandfather's work shirts, the flowers are my aunt's Easter dress. The blue stripe is a bed sheet we wore paper thin." Evan looked at it the way he looked at books, like someone's soul had been placed in his hands. Marco bought them both small rings made of spoon handles from a man with a beard shaped like a question mark. "Promise rings," the man said wryly, and they laughed and bought them anyway, because promises can be quiet and made of daily acts. Back home, they installed the new door chime. It sang a kind sound, a friendly two-note hello neighbor sound. They stood in the hall, pressing the button for no reason, laughing because the world had given them 30 seconds of uncomplicated joy. They hung the mat that said, "Please knock." They became the sort of home that told you what it needed and offered you a joke while it asked. We are not the same people we were before we are loved. Evan found the courage to ask for a minor promotion, not because he needed the title, but because the job would let him design a reading program for veterans and older adults who had stories to tell and wanted help telling them. Marco joined his union's mentorship program, teaching apprentices the small ways you do things right even when nobody's looking. They sat on the couch at night, their feet crossed, and they talked about the lonely boy each had been and the patient men they were becoming. One evening, a late friend stopped by, a man Evan knew from the library who had been having a hard season. He was the sort of person who apologized 3 times before he finished one sentence. He stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, then raised a hand toward the door as if asking permission of air. The doorbell chimed. Evan opened the door. The man's eyes were red. "I didn't know who else to call," he said. "You called, right?" Evan said. "Come in, sit. Do you want water? Tea? A blanket?" "Blanket," the man said, and laughed through his nose at himself. Marco went to the hall closet and returned with the good one, the soft one. The 3 of them sat, tools and books all around them, and made a circle big enough for Pain to rest in. They did not fix everything. That's not what that night asked of them. They listened. They made a plan. When the man left, he did so steadier than he'd arrived. And he knocked on his own heart as he went, a gentle test. "Are you there? Are you still beating? Good." That night, after the dishes were done and the blanket folded, Evan leaned into Marco's side and said, "Sometimes I feel like our living room is less a room and more a small town with an open door." "That's the plan," Marco said. Table built to hold soup and arguments and birthdays. They kissed in that low-light way that feels safe and true. Nothing the camera would turn away from. Just 2 foreheads resting together, and 2 hands held like they'd found a language they'd always known and finally trusted to speak. Months passed. Leaves let go. The world moved into the kind of cold that makes you hold your breath between car and front door. Thanksgiving happened where it needed to. Christmas happened with ornaments that had stories attached. New Year's happened with 3 friends in paper hats playing cards at the kitchen table. Ryan's knock coming through like a warm hand. Lisa's laughter making a home of every room. In January, Mrs. Whitaker fell on the ice and called out, and it was Marco who heard her and ran outside with Evan at his heels. Careful to move her slow, careful to keep her warm, careful to call the right people. Ryan met them at the hospital because a family that knocks also waits in plastic chairs with bad coffee. Mrs. Whitaker recovered. She brought them cookies like the kind grandmothers make when they know you have a soft spot caramel will fill. "You picked me up off the ground," she said to them all, including the neighbor from across the street who kept salt in his car for emergencies and pretzels. "We knock," she added, smiling, her own kind of sermon. "In this building we knock." In March, a late snow surprised the city. They turned the couch toward the window so they could watch it without the television's reflection. Snow fell steady, tender, the way flour falls onto a board a second before you roll out dough. The world quieted. The bakery below closed early, their sign handwritten and perfect. "We'll be back when the sun is." Evan read out loud, a page at a time, from a book of essays about home. Marco whittled a spoon from a scrap of wood he'd saved, not because he needed the spoon, but because sometimes you need to turn something rough into something that holds soup. On a Tuesday night in April, Evan and Marco made pasta with peas and lemon and too much Parmesan on purpose. They ate it out of bowls they'd found at a yard sale, bowls with hairline cracks that somehow made their sturdiness more beautiful. The doorbell chimed. Ryan stood in the hall with a small cardboard box and a smile he was obviously proud of. He knocked 3 times, then 4, then laughing a 5th time like a song he couldn't stop singing. "Come in," Marco said. Ryan handed Evan the box. "This is for both of you, but it's in your name, Evan," he said. "In case you ever need me to borrow a ladder again or come fix a squeak or drop off brownies." Lisa and I said, "Your door, your rules." Inside the box was a key attached to a tag that read, "Family Copy." Ryan's name was printed on one side. Evan's and Marco's were on the other. The tag came with a promise written on a small index card in Ryan's blocky handwriting. "I will always knock. I will always ask. I will always be on your side," Evan swallowed. He nodded. "Thank you," he said. "We'll hang this on the hook in the hall where we keep our best things." They did. The summer rolled around again, as faithful as a morning. The bakery put their sidewalk sign out. Neighbors returned to porches. Marco built the table he'd talked about, letters carved under the edge, his name and his grandfather's, and a small M.E. under those, because Evan had sanded the last corner smooth and said, maybe that counts as building. They ate at that table with unhurried pleasure, corn on the cob, butter soft enough to forgive late arrivals. On an evening a year after the storm, they found themselves on the couch again, the candle a new one, because wax has a way of giving itself to a room. The baseball game hummed. The doorbell chimed. Evan stood to answer. When he opened the door, he found Ryan with 2 tiny potted plants in his hands. "Housewarming gift," he said. "Even if the house has been warm for a while." "What are they?" Evan asked, smiling. "Herbs," Ryan said, squinting at the plastic markers. "One says thyme, which is spelled funny, and one says—" He turned it around. "Rosemary. Lisa says they're for longevity and remembrance. She found that on the internet, which is sometimes a place for good things." They placed the herbs in the kitchen window where they'd catch afternoon light. "We'll water them," Marco said. "We'll not overwater them. We'll learn their language. Knock, water, patience," Ryan said, counting on his fingers. "Look at us. A philosophy class." They ate together, pasta and peas again, for luck, and a salad that demanded more pepper. Ryan knocked when he came in from the back porch where he'd taken a call. He knocked when he came back from his car where he'd forgotten his wallet. He knocked every time like a man grateful to have learned a small, important thing. Evan answered each time without rolling his eyes. Courtesy had become a game everyone loved to play and win. Later, after Ryan left, and the plants had been watered and the dishes rinsed and stacked to dry, Evan and Marco stood in the hallway looking at the door. They had placed a small photo on the wall. 3 people at a table, a roast and a pie, a woman with bright eyes and a sweater she liked more than she would admit. 3 men smiling with the joy that comes from respect given and received. "We're good," Marco said, almost under his breath like telling a shy truth. "We are," Evan answered, meeting his hand with his own. They didn't need a ceremony to know what they already lived. But in July, they threw a party on the back lawn anyway, a cookout that drew neighbors and family and co-workers. They bought too many hot dog buns and cut watermelon into thick slices that dripped down wrists. They set up a small card table with a stack of note cards and a sign that said, "If you want, write us a recipe for love." People wrote sincere things. They also wrote jokes. Someone wrote, "Knock first, then hug." Someone else wrote, "Leave the last piece of pie for the person who will pretend not to want it." As the sun slid down and the stars came on with the patience of old friends, Marco tapped his glass with a spoon and said a few words. He was not a speechmaker, but he had things to say. "Thanks for being here," he said. "When I moved into that apartment, I wanted a sturdy roof and a working sink. I got those. I also got Evan," he grinned. "I got a man who reminds me every day that the good stuff in life is most often small, and that you can build love the way you build a porch, one board at a time, square and true and strong enough to hold all of us." Thanks for knocking. Thanks for staying. Thanks for reminding us that we're not alone. People clinked glasses. People hugged. People wrote recipes they'd remember and forget and remember again. Ryan knocked on the kitchen door even though it was propped open with a bag of charcoal, and Evan rolled his eyes affectionately and waved him in. Earlier, I told you this wasn't a story of fireworks. I meant it. Fireworks are loud and brief and leave smoke. This was a story of quiet courage. The courage to be tender in front of someone who knew you as a kid with a scraped knee and a crooked part. The courage to learn a new habit because someone you love needed one of your old ones to change. The courage to say I love you on a couch while the power is out, not because it's dramatic, but because it's time. Before we go, one more scene. It's evening again. The building smells like cinnamon. The baseball game is on low, and the candle is lit because that's how they mark the shift from day to night. The doorbell chimes softly. There's a knock. Evan rises and opens the door to find Ryan in a jacket that's too warm for the season because he's always a little early for the weather. He's holding a paper bag with a corner of parchment peeking out. Lisa says these are to test your willpower, he says, holding the bag out. I told her that's not nice. Come in, Evan says. Stepping back, I knocked, Ryan says, grinning. Like it's still a novelty. We noticed, Mako says, coming to the door to pull him into a hug. They stand there a second in that old, friendly hallway. Someone from upstairs passes by and says, Evening, like a song. The world is not perfect. It is, however, full of people trying, and that makes the whole thing bearable, and more than bearable, sometimes downright beautiful. They carry the cookies to the table Marco built. They pour milk because some habits deserve to be kept. They talk about the roof that needs looking at and the neighbor's cat that refuses to accept being an indoor cat and the local elections and the new exhibit at the museum. They place each other carefully in their days, not like breakable objects, but like essentials. Keys on a hook that says family copy, herbs in a window that promises light, a door with a mat that makes a joke and a request. When the evening ends, Ryan stands in the doorway and pulls his hat down and says, Love you. Like he says it to both of them now and means it the same. He steps into the hall and closes the door gently, the latch making its small, honest sound. Evan and Marco turn back toward their living room, toward the couch, toward the candle. They are home. They are safe. They are loved. And when the next storm rolls in, as it always does if you live long enough in any one place, they'll do what they've learned to do. Light a candle. Warm a bowl of chili, sit shoulder to shoulder. Listen to the rain, tell the truth, and when there's a knock, answer it with grace. Because in this story, the roommate's brother walked in without knocking once. And then, this is the beautiful part, he learned how to knock. And all of them learned how to love a little better than before.